Good evening. The headlines. The Defence Secretary, John Nott, has confirmed Argentine reports that British troops have advanced to within 2.5 miles of Port Stanley. Both Britain and Argentina have agreed that the capital's cathedral and the buildings around it will serve as a refuge for the 600 islanders and for injured servicemen. There are new fears that Argentina's supply of Exocet missiles, the type that sank the Sheffield, may be being replenished by Peru. Now those stories and the rest of the day's news with subtitles. British forces have started their final push on the capital of the Falklands, Port Stanley. The Defence Secretary, Mr. John Nott, said this evening British troops can see the Argentine forces streaming in retreat towards Stanley. British troops, he says, are on the heights of Mount Tumbledown and Wireless Ridge, only 2.5 miles from Stanley. Mr. Nott says the troops are pressing home their advantage and moving forward from their key positions. The Argentine authorities have also reported that a new three-pronged British attack using artillery and infantry started early today. The Red Cross hopes to have set up a safe zone for civilians and wounded soldiers by this evening in Port Stanley. The zone will be a whole block bounded by 4 streets and will include the Anglican Cathedral and the school. It's next to the waterfront where the Red Cross has 2 representatives on a hospital ship and will be open for the 600 civilians and for wounded servicemen. Thousands of rounds of dum-dum bullets have been captured from the Argentines by the British troops in the battle for Port Stanley. There are renewed fears that Argentina now has more Exocet missiles. They're the type which sank the Sheffield to use against the task force. It's believed by Latin American intelligence sources that the military leaders of Peru have secretly delivered several Exocets as well as other missiles. A Sea Harrier pilot who's been flying in the South Atlantic says the Argentines flew 80 planes a day against the task force. On some days they'd made up to 35 raids against British ships. About 60 more casualties from the fighting in the Falklands were flown home today to RAF Bryce Norton and then on to a military hospital near Swindon. 8 of them are seriously injured. Israeli troops have advanced up the Lebanese coast and linked up with their Christian Phalangist allies to surround the PLO forces in Beirut. The city was sealed off when Israeli tanks entered the village of Ba'abda, which lies only 5 miles from Beirut's center. The Israeli-Syrian ceasefire in the Lebanon seems to be holding. A Sea Harrier pilot who's been flying in the South Atlantic says the Argentines flew 80 planes a day against the task force. On some days they'd made up to 35 raids against British ships. About 60 more casualties from the fighting in the Falklands were flown home today to RAF Bryce Norton and then on to a military hospital near Swindon. 8 of them are seriously injured. Israeli troops have advanced up the Lebanese coast and linked up with their Christian Phalangist allies to surround the PLO forces in Beirut. The city was sealed off when Israeli tanks entered the village of Ba'abda, which lies only 5 miles from Beirut's center. The Israeli-Syrian ceasefire in the Lebanon seems to be holding, even in the Bekaa Valley, where fighting has been fierce. The Lebanese government has set up a Council of National Salvation, including left and right, Christian and Muslim, to help deal with the crisis. The Soviet Union has tonight demanded the withdrawal of Israeli troops from the Lebanon. A strongly worded statement said that events in the Lebanon could not fail to affect Soviet interests. Police in New York have arrested 1,200 demonstrators who'd been protesting against nuclear weapons. They'd tried to blockade the United Nations building to mark the start of a month-long special session there on disarmament. Today's protest followed a weekend rally when almost 1 million people marched through the city. England are on the brink of winning the first Cornhill Test at Lord's, but they have to bat again after a day-long fight back by the Indian batsmen. India were all out for 369, leaving England with 66 to win. But before tonight's close, Kapil Dev took 3 wickets. England ended 23 for 3. England's World Cup team have caused offence and some embarrassment to their Spanish hosts by not attending a reception in Bilbao. The mayor had been expecting the whole squad, but only the manager, Ron Greenwood, and a few FA officials attended. The local press immediately claimed that England had snubbed the city. A spokesman for the players said they didn't mean to offend their hosts. They were busy preparing for Wednesday's match against France. And on this, the first day of the World Cup tournament, Italy drew 0-0 with Poland. In Newsnight tonight, as the final battle for Port Stanley now seems to be underway, John Tusa discusses the way ahead for the islands with Cecil Parkinson, chairman of the Conservative Party and member of the War Cabinet. In the Middle East, the Lebanese capital is now completely isolated. The Israelis control all land, sea and air routes to and from Beirut. Israel's Deputy Foreign Minister tells Newsnight of his country's strategy now. And as England prepares to do battle on the football field in the Spanish Basque country, David Tyndall reports on the terrorists' threat which casts its shadow throughout that region. That's all in Newsnight tonight at the later time of 10:55. Now a look at the weather.